Thank you very much, Jeff. We're now going to head into the world's fastest panel discussion because there is so much to unpack from what we've heard this afternoon. I'd like to welcome back to the stage Nicola, Tan, Kate and Jeff. Time for your questions as well. If you have any, feel free to pop them into the app and we'll try and weave together some of what we have heard over the next 10 minutes. So Nicola, as you race up to the stage, my first question is for you. What would you say to someone who's been listening this afternoon? They've been hearing about personalisation, they've been hearing about social media, they've been hearing about credentials and planetary accounting and all of these things, and they just think, man, I'm just trying to keep my business running. How do I not be overwhelmed by the pace of change across all of these areas?
Yeah, I feel overwhelmed actually after listening to last hour. I sit on a number of food and beverage boards in New Zealand and we're having a lot of these exact conversations all the time. And I think the advice I would give probably is you've got to still look at it through the lens of relevance to your industry, your customer, your channels and your consumers. And a lot of people take a lot of this information and then suddenly take it into a direction that actually is not relevant to the business that you are trying to grow. And so what I would look through is, from a governance lens anyway, be thinking about where is that future thought, where is your purpose, what is your vision for the business, and then how are you thinking about that in the context of where you're going to derive value. And outside of that, you then have all of the risks that could impact your business, but thinking about that really through a value creation lens would be my advice.
Tan, in terms of social media and tech and AI, there's perhaps a generational element to this as well, where digital natives, those who are younger, they're a little bit more up with the play. They don't feel as confused or overwhelmed by some of these things. How can experienced leaders in horticulture tap into the knowledge and the passion that's within their younger communities of staff members and members?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, and a lot of us have children. And our children communicate differently. They're on different platforms. I think we start to need to trust younger generations with how they communicate. There's definitely a role for traditional media still. And even though it is a very fractured market, we can still create campaigns that are both for social and traditional. But for the younger generation that know how to communicate to a younger audience, we're gonna need to start trusting them to communicate to those audiences, whilst the older generation have an idea of how to communicate on radio and whatnot. And I think that as you mentioned, the leaders out there need to start kind of listening to younger generations just in terms of how they communicate, rather than kind of being like, I don't communicate like that, I don't see the value in that way. And they know that themselves that that's not how the world is anymore.
I asked one of our earlier speakers whether our geographical isolation means that we are maybe not as aware of the changes that are happening in some of these other big markets. Jeff, your video was incredible, the event in Dubai, having the Māori Queen there as well. What do you notice when you travel about the opportunities that are out there for New Zealand businesses?
I come back to that, the authenticity of what we bring, our points of difference when we go into market. We have a different personality, and I think we're more natural, and I think that's how we can build an immediate rapport with people. So that's one thing I notice, and particularly with our kiwi fruit, we know our quality exceeds what else is in the market. You just have to go in the stores anywhere in the world and you see kiwi, you know which one's New Zealand zestberry kiwi fruit. There's a distinct difference in the quality.
How do we make sure, to any of you, how do we make sure that we're not spending a whole lot of money, whether it's on tech or marketing or new relationships, because we're chasing the latest shiny thing that some expert or commentator has told us we need to focus on, and maybe that wouldn't even pay a return in a few years' time? Is there a level of risk that we just need to accept? Or how do we make smart decisions around this stuff?
I always say follow consumer needs, not trends. So it's very easy. Today we talked about a lot of trends, and I'd be letting those go straight out your mind. They're interesting, but they're here for a small period of time. So it's about thinking through that and saying, where is the consumer going to be in 10, 15, 20 years, and what are they going to care about, and what are they going to need? What are they really going to need? And that is very different to a consumer who's sitting in India and rising into the middle class versus a consumer that's sitting in the US versus a consumer that's sitting in another market. So you have to connect up what are the long-term sort of needs that are happening in different consumer bases, and then where is the New Zealand value going to be derived with what our products might be that we're sending there.
Kate, as I travel around the country, I have conversations with some people who say, oh, well, sustainability, that was a really big thing 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. The political winds have changed, the pendulum sort of swung back a bit, we're not focusing on it as much. How do we make sure that our awareness stays in sync with what's happening in the global market and where other economies and other cultures are at with the sustainability conversation?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question because I think, 15 years ago when I worked in sustainability, you didn't say the S word. You had to talk about risk and any word other than sustainability, really. And it's felt a little bit like that in the last maybe 18 months.
Yep.
But what's really interesting is the data trends, although the political and economic headwinds suggest that sustainability is falling away, the demand from consumers and the actually international regulatory shift, and also if you look at investors, especially Australia and New Zealand investors, actually everything's trending towards more focus on the environment. And so, we do watch these pendulums swing, but it's swinging, in an increasing importance on the environment. And I think actually one of the things that's really driving that increased importance is that we're now seeing the impacts of climate change every day. It's not a future thing. We're like, oh, that's here, which for a long time people were like, oh, that's for future generations. But yeah.
Tan, there's an element of Kiwi culture which is about not being too flashy or too showy, not blowing your own trumpet, not sticking your head above the parapet. That's kind of the complete opposite of social media, which is look at me, look at how great we are, look at what we're doing. I assume that racking up 150 million views on social media is not easy. How do we get over that sort of cultural cringe that prevents us from telling our own story?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question because it's also the tall poppy syndrome we have in Australia. And, I'm not like arrogant and floating my boat that I've got all these millions of views because all of my content is educational, but there's an element of engaging in the right way to make sure people are listening. And, you had this question about, the shiny new thing. I think we just need to be authentic. I'm really passionate about this topic. I really want people to have a healthy well-being, and I want to create timeless pieces of work. I want to create pieces of work and communicate things that in 15 years' time will still be relevant because it's maybe nutritionally balanced. Maybe we already do so much. The New Zealanders already do so much for the environment, but maybe we need to tell that story over and over again, but different stories. I think that, you asked a question about getting over this kind of Americanism of selling yourself. I don't think it should be about that. I think we are seeking authentic voices online, and maybe you need to be a bigger version of yourself. I'm wearing a kiwi fruit T-shirt.
Yeah, this is from the guy wearing a kiwi fruit T-shirt on
Jeff
stage.
is very happy. No, but I'm actually really proud of it. And there is a cringe factor, but I think if we have a go, if we're not afraid, if we support each other as an industry and we don't put each other down. I remember the first time I made a video in the market, other people were saying to me, what's he doing? Get a real job.
Yeah.
And I don't want the future generations to be like that. So support each other.
Well, you're not cringe, and we're glad to have you here. Thank you very much for being here. I just want to end by asking each of you about that word trust. And as Jeff mentioned, it is the word that has come up in each of your presentations. I was listening carefully for it. So I'd like to ask each of you, what is the one simple thing, and not that any of this is simple, but is one practical thing that everyone in the room can do to build trust with the future consumer? Nicola, maybe you can kick us off.
I think it's pretty simple. It's set some standards and then do what you say you're going to do every time. And the hard thing for companies is transparency as a result is really high now. You have to be visible, you have to have a view, you have to respond. But the consistency at which you do that is how you build trust with your consumers. And it just gets harder and harder and harder. So you have to be very comfortable opening the corporate doors, so to speak, and letting consumers in and letting them seeing how you milk cows or harvest or grow, and that at times is really uncomfortable, but that's the only way we're going to build trust.
I think building on that point of transparency, I think that's a really scary thing to do when you're talking about environmental impact, because nobody's has none, you know, and so you're telling somebody bad news. But it's really important to be transparent about that, because actually if you stay silent, more than half of consumers assume you've got something to hide. So you're much better to say, this is where I am today, this is where I want to be tomorrow, and this is how I'm going to get there, than to say nothing at all, but without overstating it, because the moment you try and overstate or oversell where you are on that journey, then you've got the greenwashing police after you.
Yeah, I think the trust factor is huge, and we establish trust through how we connect and how we communicate. I think, you know, and I keep mentioning the word simple, keep things simple. And it's the simple thing of communicating, timely communication, and we talk about transparency. When you look at what the government's doing today with the changes in the RMA and the potential impacts, that's why us as Māori are real hot on this subject. And we know what we know, and we've got historical history passed on from, and we know a lot about our rohe, our area. We knew what it looked like, the food. These places we call food baskets no longer exist. And that's through development, inevitable. But we know with some of the risks associated with this change in legislation. And to enable us as exporters out there on the global stage, we have to clearly demonstrate and maintain or enhance this clean, green image that we go on about.
Thank you, Jeff. Last word to you, Tan.
Yeah, to add on to Kate, we need to see transparency and truth as an asset, not something to manage as a risk. I can't tell you the amount of times I've been briefed to make content, and then by the end of it, it's been withered down so that the story turns into almost nothing. So the truth, I'm a firm believer that the truth will set you free. And you can easily tell when you chat to somebody one-on-one if you're connecting with them, as Jeff said, and we just need to do that in more spaces across all of the things that we do.
Truth and trust, two words that we'll take away from this session. Thank you all for your insights. Let's give them a big round of applause. Now, before we close this afternoon's session, we're going to do another one of our little spotlight sessions, and this one is with Tim Cadogan, who is the former Central Otago Mayor, now working for the new Water Services Authority, Taumata Arawai, and he's here to tell us how he's fixed the whole system and we'll be happy for the rest of our lives with water and infrastructure in New Zealand. Let's welcome Tim to the stage.
Kia ora, thank you.
What have you got for us?
Well, I don't know how you got that intro that we've solved everything, because we haven't, which is why I'm here. Look,
Well, I'm being hopeful.
yeah, I'm very hopeful. Look at this face. But for those of you out there, you're probably going one of two thoughts. Either A, who the hell is the Water Services Authority, Taumata Arawai? Or if you know the answer to that question, you're thinking, what the hell is the Water Services Authority, Taumata Arawai, doing here? So if I can, I'll answer the first question. I've got 5 minutes. We're standing between you and drink, so I appreciate those of you who aren't walking out the door. We came into being as a consequence of the 2016 Havelock North Water debacle, where 3 or 4 people died, 5,000 made sick. Some of you will be from the Hawke's Bay, you know that already. And what I'll get is people say to me in this job, well, Tim, it was 10 years ago. Get over it. So let me tell you about September last year with a camping ground in North Canterbury where they had a Shiga toxin-producing E. coli get into their water supply. Very much a camping ground, very much like many of your orchard workers' accommodations. So the water treatment system wasn't working, this toxin got in. 6 kids got hospitalised. School camp come along, 6 kids got hospitalised. One of those kids was in hospital for 10 days and they were worried she was going to lose her kidney function. One of the parents looked after his kid at home. He was a bit immunocompromised. He wound up in a coma for a number of days. So this isn't playtime. Water safety is very serious. So that's why we're in existence. Why are we here? Because for those of you who are water suppliers, and this is groups that are supplying more than 26 people water, or supplying drinking water, or supplying the public water, you are a water supplier. You're going to be caught by regulation if you're not already registered. So for those of you in that group, you need to be registered with us by November 2028, and you need to be compliant with the regulations by November 2030. Don't panic. We've changed the acceptable solutions. We went out to the market last year, talked to a lot of people, because we've had these in place for 3 years. They could have been better, so we've made them better. We've made the treatment systems a lot more affordable, the ones that are allowed and so forth. So what I would like to invite all of you to do is come and see us at Stand 7, because we'd love to talk about your individual setups, whether you are going to be deemed a water supplier, and if so, how we can make the pathway easy for you to become compliant and register with us. One takeaway I'd like you to have, we're the regulator, we're the water police, if you like. When it comes to the small suppliers, we really want to help. I know it sounds odd, we're from Wellington and we're here to help, the old Ronald Reagan line, but we are. We know that you've got plenty on your plate, and we don't want, this is another thing, how are we going to manage this? It's not going to be that hard. There may be some expense involved depending on the numbers you're dealing with in this particular circumstances. We can't give you money to fix that, but we can at least make the pathway easier as we head to those November 28, November 30 dates. That was the short answer.
Wonderful. Well, being part of the conversation and getting the information that you need is much better than just complaining or being in the dark. So do take the opportunity to chat with Tim and the team. And just very briefly, what's the thing that you are most hopeful about or optimistic about in this space, that you're working in?
It's the fact that we've increased in the time that we've been in play 400,000 people getting safe drinking water in New Zealand. You know, a lot of us get the fortunate ability to travel overseas, and we're quite used to, in some countries, not putting ice in your drink or not drinking, or be careful with brushing your teeth. You shouldn't have to think like that in New Zealand. We've spent 5 years working really hard on getting council supplies into a position where you don't have to think like that. Still one or two that there's some risk there, but we'll have them sorted out in no time, which is why us and the legislation are now looking at the smaller suppliers. But again, I emphasise that point. We're actually here to help you, and it's part of not making your staff sick, which of course you're all over. You all know that already. You're probably doing everything you need to do as it is already.
Good on you, Tim. Thank you very much
Excellent.
for being here to close
Pleasure.
our day.
Thank
Let's
you.
give Tim a round of applause. Thank you, mate.